The first time they heard the noise, it wasn't a meow. Not really. It was something smaller, a whisper of sound like a leaf scraping against metal. You're here, listening, and that means more than you know. If you feel safe in these stories, your one subscribe helps me keep this quiet little corner alive. Thank you for being part of this peaceful world. It was March, but winter hadn't fully let go. The air still bit, still carried that damp, early morning chill that seeped into bones. Daniel was running late, again. His hands fumbled with the keys, breath fogging in front of him as he yanked open the car door. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then, beneath the mechanical groan, there it was again, a sound that didn't belong. He turned the key off. Silence. Then, a tiny, broken chirp. Daniel froze. He knew what stray cats sounded like. He'd grown up in a neighborhood where they lurked under porches, darted between trash cans. But this wasn't a yowl or a hiss. This was the sound of something trapped. Kneeling on the cold pavement, he peered under the car. Nothing. Then, slowly, he lifted the hood. Heat radiated from the engine. Oil and metal smells filled his nose. And there, curled into a tight, trembling ball against the battery, was a cat. Not just any cat. A creature so small, so delicate, it looked like a shadow that had somehow gained a heartbeat. Its fur was matted with grease, one ear nicked at the tip, an old wound. But its eyes, they were wide, terrified, and green. Not the bright green of grass or leaves, but the deep, almost golden green of old bottle glass. Daniel exhaled. He'd been having a terrible week. A terrible year, if he was honest. The divorce papers were still sitting unsigned on his kitchen table. His daughter, Lily, hadn't spoken to him in 3 weeks. And now, this. A stray, hiding in the one place he couldn't ignore. "Hey," he murmured, reaching out slowly. The cat flinched, pressing itself deeper into the machinery. A gust of wind cut through the parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn blared. Life moved on, indifferent. But here, in this frozen moment, Daniel felt something shift. This wasn't just a cat. This was the beginning of something. He didn't know it yet. But in 6 months, this tiny, grease-stained creature would save his family in a way he could never have imagined, and it would start with a single trembling breath. Have you ever found an animal in an unexpected place? What did you do? The grease wouldn't come off easily. Daniel filled his bathroom sink with warm water, steam curling in the chilly air of his too-empty apartment. He'd wrapped the trembling creature in an old, threadbare towel, the one Lily used to use after swimming lessons. The cat didn't fight, just shivered. Its eyes, those bottle glass greens, were fixed on him with a depth of silent terror that felt like a physical weight. If this gentle story brought even a tiny smile or calm to your heart, would you consider subscribing? It helps me keep sharing these soft moments for you and for anyone who needs peace tonight. He dipped a corner of the washcloth in the water. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken much aloud since Sarah left, taking half the furniture, and all the laughter with her. The apartment echoed. He touched the cloth to the cat's grimy flank, a flinch. A low, guttural sound that wasn't quite a growl, more like the vibration of fear. "Just cleaning you up, pal," Daniel whispered, his own hands unsteady. "Can't have you smelling like a mechanic." He worked slowly, inch by matted inch. The grease was stubborn, ingrained. Beneath the black sludge, the fur was revealed as a patchy, dull gray. The cat's ribs were sharp ridges under his fingers. Starving. Like something the world had forgotten. Just like me, Daniel thought. The unbidden. Comparison startling him. He pushed it away. He focused on the task. The warm water, the rhythmic, careful strokes, the tiny heartbeat thrumming against the towel. He noticed the nick on the ear was healed, a pale scar. He saw the pads of its paws were cracked and dry. He talked, soft, aimless words, about the stupid traffic he'd sat in yesterday, about the leaky faucet he kept meaning to fix, about the leftover spaghetti he'd probably burn for dinner. Nonsense. A stream of sound to fill the crushing silence, to soothe the wild thing in his hands. He didn't mention Lily. He couldn't. The ache was too fresh, too raw. The last phone call played on a loop in his head. You weren't there, Dad. Again. You're never there. He rinsed the cloth. The water turned murky gray. The cat's shivering began to lessen. Not gone, but quieter. Its gaze hadn't left Daniel's face, but the terror was slowly being replaced by exhaustion, utter, bone-deep weariness. Its head drooped slightly against the towel. Daniel finished rinsing as best he could. He didn't dare attempt the face yet. He lifted the bundle, damp and smelling faintly of dish soap now instead of engine oil, and carried it into the living room. He placed it gently on the worn corduroy couch, Sarah's favorite spot. He draped another towel over it for warmth. He stood back. The cat was a small, damp mound on the too big cushion, utterly still. Watching him, Daniel felt a ridiculous wave of uncertainty. What now? Food? Water? A litter box made from, what? A shoebox? He felt clumsy, unprepared. This wasn't his life. His life was court dates, silent dinners, and staring. At the ceiling at 3 a.m. He went to the kitchen, rummaged, found an old plastic takeout container, filled it with water, found a can of tuna, the cheap kind, packed in oil. He forked some into a chipped saucer. He placed both offerings on the floor near the couch. Then he retreated to the armchair across the room. He sat. He waited. Minutes ticked by. The radiator clanked. A siren wailed faintly in the distance. The cat didn't move. Its eyes were half closed now, but Daniel sensed it was still aware, still calculating. Then, slowly, painfully slowly, the gray head lifted. The nose twitched. The scent of tuna, pungent and rich, filled the small space. Daniel held his breath. The cat unwrapped itself from the towel. It stood, shaky on its thin legs. It looked at Daniel, then at the food, then back at Daniel. It took one tentative step off the couch, then another. Its movements were stiff, cautious. It approached the saucer like a bomb might detonate. It sniffed, and then it ate. Not ravenously, but steadily, deliberately, each small bite taken with intense focus. The sound was quiet, rhythmic, the scrape of tiny teeth on ceramic. Daniel watched. Something tight in his chest, something that had been clenched like a fist for months, began to loosen. Just a fraction, just enough to let him breathe. He didn't move. He barely blinked. He just witnessed this small act of survival, of tentative trust. He fell asleep in the armchair. When he woke hours later, stiff-necked and disoriented in the dim evening light, the saucer was licked clean. The water dish had been touched. The cat was gone from the floor. His heart sank for a moment, a ridiculous pang of loss. Of course, it was a stray. It had eaten and left. Why would it stay in this tomb of an apartment? He rubbed his eyes, stood, and turned towards the kitchen to make that burned spaghetti, and stopped. There, on the corduroy couch, curled into the exact center of the cushion Sarah used to claim, was the cat, asleep. Not just asleep, deeply asleep. Its sides rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. Its head was tucked under one paw. The scarred ear twitched slightly in a dream. Daniel stood frozen. He hadn't heard a sound. He hadn't felt it jump back up. It had chosen to return, to sleep, here. in the spot saturated with memories of a life that was gone. He didn't move towards it. He didn't want to break the spell. He just watched. The rise and fall of its breathing seemed to sync, slowly, with his own. The silence of the apartment wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with this small, living presence, this fragile rhythm of life. He named it then, silently. Not out loud, not yet, but in the quiet space of his own heart. Smudge. For the gray fur, still patchy and damp. For the smudge of grease he'd missed near its tail. For the smudge of light it brought into the oppressive, gray of his world. He made his spaghetti. He ate it standing at the kitchen counter looking back at the couch at the sleeping cat. The silence felt different, less like a void, more like a held breath. The next days blurred into a strange new routine. Daniel went to work. He came home. Smudge was always there, hiding at first, under the bed, behind the dusty curtains in the spare room Lily had once used. But always present. Daniel learned its language. The slow blink when he entered the room, a sign of trust he remembered reading somewhere long ago. The soft, almost inaudible chirp when he opened the tuna can. The way it would stretch, long and luxurious, after waking, its tiny claws flexing against the rug. He bought proper food, a cheap litter box and litter, a single, slightly bedraggled catnip mouse from the corner store. Smudge ignored the mouse but appreciated the litter box immediately. Daniel found himself talking more. To Smudge. About the tedious report he'd filed. About the idiot driver who'd cut him off. About the way the light hit the fire escape in the late afternoon, turning the rusted metal gold. He still didn't talk about Lily. Or Sarah. The words lodged in his throat, sharp and painful. But sometimes, late at night when the apartment felt coldest and the silence loudest, he'd sit in the armchair and Smudge would appear. Not demanding, just there. It would sit a few feet away, cleaning. A paw with meticulous care, or just gazing out the darkened window. Its quiet presence was an anchor. One evening, Daniel tried. The words felt thick, clumsy. "Lily, she loved cats," he said to the empty air, his voice cracking. "Wanted one for years. Sarah was allergic, or said she was." He stared at his hands. The silence pressed in, then a soft sound. A thump. Smudge had jumped down from the windowsill. It walked slowly across the rug. It stopped near Daniel's feet, looked up at him with those unblinking green eyes. Then, with infinite care, it stretched its neck and gently, deliberately bumped its head against Daniel's shin. Just once, a soft, warm pressure. A tiny nudge. It wasn't a purr. It wasn't a rub. It was a deliberate, quiet touch. A connection. Daniel's breath hitched. He didn't reach down. He didn't speak. He just felt it. That small, solid point of contact against his leg. A silent acknowledgement in the dark. It was the first time anyone or anything had touched him with simple presence, without demand or disappointment, in a very long time. He sat very still, tears burning behind his eyes, afraid to move and break the fragile bridge that tiny headbutt had built. Smudge didn't linger. After a moment, it turned and padded silently back towards the couch. But the imprint of warmth against Daniel's shin lingered long after. He started leaving Lily's door open. Just a crack. Smudge never went in. It would sit at the threshold. Sometimes, looking in at the frozen museum of her childhood, the posters, the abandoned stuffed rabbit on the bed, but it never crossed the line. Until one night. Daniel woke suddenly. Not from a nightmare, but from a sound. A rhythmic, persistent scritch, scritch, scritch. He lay still in the dark, listening. It was coming from the hallway, near Lily's room. His pulse quickened. He got up, moving quietly. The apartment, was dark, illuminated only by the streetlight glow filtering through the living room blinds. He peered down the hallway. There, in the strip of light falling from Lily's slightly open door, was Smudge. It wasn't trying to enter. It was standing on its hind legs, front paws braced against the wall beside Lily's doorframe. And it was. Scratching, not frantic but deliberate, methodical. Scritch, 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 at a specific spot, about 3 feet up the wall. Daniel watched, frozen in confusion. What was it doing? Marking? Trying to dig? The behavior felt odd, unnervingly focused. "Smudge," he whispered. The cat stopped instantly. It dropped to all fours, turned its head, and looked directly at Daniel. Its eyes gleamed in the low light. It held his gaze for a long, silent moment. Then, without a sound, it turned and walked past him, back towards the living room couch. Daniel approached the wall. He ran his fingers over the spot Smudge had been scratching. The paint was slightly roughed up, nothing more. Just a patch of textured plaster. Why there? He looked at the height. 3 feet. About the height Lily had been when she was 5 or 6, when she'd loved to press stickers onto this very wall until Sarah had made her stop. A coincidence. It had to be. He shook his head, trying to dispel the strange chill that had crept down his spine. He closed Lily's door a little tighter. He went back to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. He lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the city sounds, and the memory of that deliberate rhythmic scratching echoed in his mind. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It wasn't the sound of a cat marking territory. It sounded like it was trying to tell him something. When did you first feel a rescued animal truly begin to trust you? Was it a look, a touch, a shared quiet moment? The scratching didn't stop. It became a nocturnal ritual. Almost every night around 2 a.m., Daniel would stir from a thin, restless sleep. The sound would seep through the apartment's quiet. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Persistent, focused. Always at that same spot beside Lily's door. He'd get up, pad down the hallway. Find Smudge there, balanced precariously, diligently working at the plaster. The cat would stop when it saw him, drop down, and simply watch him, those bottle green eyes unreadable in the gloom. Then it would turn and vanish back towards the living room, leaving Daniel alone in the dark hallway, staring at the slightly roughened patch on the wall. He tried ignoring it. He tried shooing Smudge away gently. He even tried putting a piece of cardboard over the spot. Smudge just scratched beside the cardboard, its claws finding the wall again with unnerving accuracy. It wasn't destructive, not really. It wasn't tearing chunks out. It was wearing it down, like water on stone, or a prisoner marking days on a cell wall. The sound started to burrow into Daniel's days. He'd be reviewing a tedious contract. At work, the drone of the office fluorescent lights overhead and the phantom echo of scritch, scritch, scritch would vibrate in his skull. He'd flinch. His colleague would ask if he was okay. He'd just shake his head, forcing a smile. That felt brittle. The apartment felt different now. Less like a refuge, more like a space holding its breath. Waiting. The silence between the scratching sessions grew heavier, charged with an unspoken question. Smudge's daytime behavior shifted subtly, too. It became watchful. It spent less time curled asleep on the couch and more time perched on the back of the armchair or on the windowsill, gazing out, its tail twitching occasionally like a metronome. It followed Daniel from room to room with a quiet intensity it hadn't shown before. Not needy, not begging for food, just present, observant. Daniel found himself talking less. The easy monologues about traffic or burnt spaghetti dried up. He'd look at Smudge and the questions would crowd his throat, silent and thick. Why? What are you trying to tell me? What's behind that wall? He felt ridiculous. It was a cat. An intelligent cat, perhaps, but still just a cat. driven by instinct, by scent, by some unknowable feline logic, attributing meaning to its actions. Felt like the desperate grasping of a lonely man. But the scratching, it wasn't random. It was precise. It was determined. It felt purposeful. Every time someone subscribes, it's like another little light turns on in this peaceful corner of YouTube. If this story touched you tonight, please stay with me. I'd love to share more soft, sleepy cat tales with you. One rainy Tuesday, the tension snapped. Daniel came home late from a draining mediation session about the divorce. More arguments, more recriminations, the ghost of Sarah's disappointment hanging heavy in the sterile conference room. He was soaked, his shoulders knotted with stress, the taste of cheap coffee and defeat sour in his mouth. He unlocked the apartment door, stepped into the familiar dimness, and dropped his briefcase with a thud. Silence. No Smudge greeting him at the door. No slow blink from the couch. Smudge? His voice sounded hollow in the quiet apartment. Nothing. A prickle of irrational fear traced his spine. He flicked on the hallway light. The patch on the wall beside Lily's door looked different. Whiter, more exposed. Smudge had clearly been at it again more vigorously than before. But where was he? Daniel moved down the hallway, his wet shoes squeaking slightly on the linoleum. He pushed Lily's door fully open. The room was exactly as Lily had left it months ago during her last, stilted weekend visit. Bed neatly made, shelves cluttered, with childhood trophies and dusty books, the air smelling faintly of lavender potpourri and abandonment. No cat. He checked under the bed, behind the door. Inside the closet, pushing aside forgotten sweaters. Nothing. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise. Had Smudge gotten out? Had he finally decided this tomb wasn't worth staying in? Had Daniel, in his fog of self-pity and distraction, failed? This tiny creature too? He rushed back to the living room, calling Smudge's name, his voice cracking. He checked behind the curtains, under the couch, behind the radiator. His heart hammered against his ribs. The apartment felt vast, echoing, and utterly empty. The scratching, the watchful presence. Had it all been leading to this? To another loss? He slumped onto the armchair, burying his face in his hands. The rain lashed against the windows. The radiator clanked. The silence roared. He felt the familiar weight of failure settle on him, heavier than ever. Failed husband, failed father, now, failed rescuer. He couldn't even keep a stray cat safe. A sound, small, not a meow, not a scratch, a thump, muffled. Coming from the hallway? Daniel lifted his head. He listened intently. Another soft thump, like something padded hitting plaster. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct, coming from inside the wall, near Lily's. Door. He stood slowly, his breath catching. He walked back to the hallway, stopping before the scarred patch of plaster. He pressed his ear against it, cold, rough against his skin. He held his breath. Silence. Then, scritch. Faint, muffled, but unmistakable, coming from within the wall cavity. Smudge was inside the wall. How? Why? Daniel's mind raced. He remembered old houses, sometimes having gaps, loose panels. But this was a solid plaster wall in a fairly modern apartment building. He ran his hands over the area Smudge had been scratching. The plaster felt slightly different. Less solid than the surrounding area? Or was that his imagination? He tapped the wall gently. Hollow? It was hard to tell. He tapped beside the spot. Sounded the same. He tapped on the spot. Maybe a fraction less resonant? He pressed harder. The plaster gave, just a tiny bit. Like pressing on a thick cardboard box. Smudge, he called, his voice tight with worry. Smudge, are you in there? Can you get out? Another muffled scritch answered him. Then silence. Daniel's fear for Smudge warred with a dawning, chilling realization. This wasn't random behavior. Smudge hadn't accidentally gotten inside the wall. He'd been trying to get in for days, weeks. He'd been working to get in, with terrifying, silent persistence. Why? What was inside that wall that drew the cat so powerfully? A nest of mice? A draft? Or something else? He remembered the height. Lily's height when she was small. He remembered the stickers. Lily had loved stickers. She'd plastered them everywhere until Sarah, worried about the paint and the mess, had gently but firmly discouraged it. Except Lily had been stubborn. Daniel recalled a phase around 6 years old where she'd started hiding her stickers, putting them in secret places, inside books, under her pillow, behind furniture, or inside walls. A memory surfaced, sharp and sudden. Lily, maybe 7, holding a small, sparkly unicorn sticker, looking crestfallen because Sarah had said no to putting it on the wall. Daniel, distracted, trying to work from home, had mumbled something like, "Maybe find a secret spot for it, kiddo." A magic hiding place. Had she? Had she found a loose piece of plaster? A tiny gap? Had she shoved her treasures inside the wall? It seemed absurd. Yet, Smudge was in the wall. Smudge, who seemed to sense things, who avoided Lily's room but obsessed over this one spot outside it. Daniel pressed his ear to the wall again. "Smudge? Hang on, buddy. I'm gonna get you out." He needed tools. A screwdriver? A hammer? He couldn't just start smashing the wall. He was a tenant. This was damage. Panic warred with practicality. He ran to the kitchen junk drawer, rummaging frantically through screwdrivers, tape, random keys. He found a small pry bar he'd used years ago to open a stuck window. It was crude, but it might work on the edge of the plaster if he was careful. He hurried back, kneeling before the wall. He inserted the thin edge of the pry bar into the slight give where Smudge had been scratching near the baseboard. He applied gentle pressure. The plaster cracked, a small piece flaking off. It was surprisingly brittle. He worked the bar in. A little further, levering slowly, a small hole appeared, no bigger than a coin. Dust puffed out, smelling dry and ancient. Daniel peered in. Darkness. He couldn't see anything. But he could hear Smudge more clearly now. A faint, anxious, mewling sound from inside the cavity. Okay, I see you," Daniel murmured, though he couldn't. "Just hold on." He widened the hole carefully, using the pry bar and his fingers, to break away the weakened plaster. It crumbled easily now. The hole grew to the size of his palm. He shone his phone flashlight inside. The beam cut through the dusty gloom. He saw wooden lath, cobwebs thick as felt. And there, huddled on a horizontal beam, eyes wide and reflecting the light like tiny emerald mirrors, was Smudge. The cat was coated in fine gray plaster dust, making its fur look ghostly. "Smudge!" Relief flooded Daniel, thick and warm. "Come on, buddy, out you come." He reached in slowly. Smudge didn't shy away. It just watched him, trembling slightly. Daniel carefully scooped the dusty cat out, pulling it gently through the hole. Smudge immediately burrowed into Daniel's chest, plaster dust puffing from its fur, a low, rumbling purr vibrating against Daniel's shirt. It felt like holding a small, frightened cloud. Daniel held the trembling cat close, stroking its dusty back, murmuring reassurances. His heart was still pounding from the scare. He looked back at the hole in the wall, the dark cavity yawning like a secret mouth. He shone his phone light back inside, sweeping the beam around. Cobwebs, dust, the skeletal wood lath, and then something else, caught on a nail, fluttering. Slightly in the draft from the hole was a small piece of paper, not modern paper. It looked old, thick, yellowed at the edges. Daniel's breath caught. He reached in, fingers brushing against rough wood and sticky cobwebs, and carefully dislodged the paper. He pulled it out into the hallway light. It wasn't just a scrap. It was a child's drawing, done in thick, waxy crayon, crude, vibrant lines, a bright yellow sun in the corner, a lopsided blue house, green scribbles that were probably grass, and 3 stick figures holding hands. One tall, one medium, one small, all smiling wide, toothy smiles. Across the bottom, in large, uneven capital letters, painstakingly written by a small child, was the word family, Lily's drawing. He remembered it. She'd been so proud. She'd shown it to him. He'd praised it, absently while checking emails. He vaguely remembered her being upset later because she couldn't find it. She'd thought she'd lost it. He'd bought her ice cream to cheer her up. She hadn't lost it. She'd hidden it, in her magic hiding place. Inside the wall, Smudge purred against his chest, the vibrations steady and warm. Daniel stared at the drawing, the bright, naive happiness of it, a stark, painful contrast to the fractured reality of his life now. The tall stick figure was him. The medium one, Sarah, the small one, Lily, holding hands under a smiling sun. Family. Tears blurred his vision. He hadn't cried since Sarah left. Not really, but now, holding this dusty, rescued cat and this lost relic of a lost happiness, the dam broke. Silent sobs shook his shoulders. He sank to his knees in the hallway, clutching Smudge and the fragile piece of paper. Smudge didn't struggle. It just pressed closer, its purr deepening, a low, comforting rumble against Daniel's heart. The cat's green eyes watched him, calm, knowing, as if it understood the weight of the small, yellowed paper Daniel held, as if this was what it had been trying to show him all along. The scratching hadn't been random. It hadn't been about mice or drafts. It had been about this, about a memory sealed away, about a little girl's hope hidden in the dark, about the ghost of a family that once was. Smudge had found it. Smudge had led him to it. Daniel knelt there, rain streaking the windows, dust settling around him, holding the 2 most precious things he had left in the world: a stray cat covered in plaster and a child's drawing of a dream that had crumbled. The mystery of the scratching was solved, but it cracked open a deeper, more painful chasm inside him. He looked at the hole in the wall. It wasn't just an opening in the plaster. It felt like an opening into his own past, into his own failure. What else was hidden in there? What other forgotten pieces of Lily's childhood, of their life together, lay entombed? Smudge bumped his head gently against Daniel's chin, pulling him back. The purr was insistent now, a grounding force. Daniel took a shuddering breath. He looked from the drawing to the cat, then back to the dark cavity in the wall. The scratching was over. But the journey into that darkness, it felt like it was only just beginning. He knew, with a certainty that settled cold in his stomach, that he needed to see what else was inside. For Lily, for the ghost of the family in the drawing. Maybe even for himself. Has an animal ever seemed to sense your sadness or lead you to something important? Share your story below. Sometimes the quietest companions understand the loudest hurts. The hole stared back, a jagged, dusty maw in the hallway plaster, exhaling the scent of old wood and forgotten time. Daniel knelt before it, Smudge a warm, plaster-dusted weight purring against his chest, the child's drawing of family clutched in his trembling hand. The bright, waxy crayon felt impossibly fragile against the crushing weight of memory. The radiator clanked, a jarring counterpoint to the silent roar in his ears. He couldn't leave it like this. Not now. Not after Smudge had clawed through the literal and metaphorical wall. The drawing was a message, a plea from the past. What else had Lily hidden? What other fragments of her childhood joy, her trust, her need for him, lay entombed in the dark? Every new subscriber is like a warm cup of tea to my soul. It keeps this little channel going. If you felt something from this story, I'd love for you to stay. Gently, he set Smudge down on the floor. The cat immediately began meticulously cleaning the dust from its fur, its tongue rasping against grayed patches, utterly unconcerned by the seismic shift it had triggered. Daniel placed the drawing carefully on the floor beside him, smoothing its wrinkled edges. He picked up the small pry bar again. His hands were steady now, resolved, not with the frantic energy of rescuing Smudge, but with a grim, determined focus. He started widening the hole, carefully at first, then with more purpose as the brittle plaster crumbled away. It wasn't a sophisticated job. Chunks fell, exposing the skeletal wooden lath beneath, creating a rough opening about the size of a dinner plate. Dust billowed in thick clouds, making him cough, coating his clothes, his hair, the hallway floor. He shone his phone light into the cavity, sweeping the beam slowly. Beyond the initial layer of cobwebs and dust, the space between the studs was cluttered, but not with debris. Nestled against the back of the plaster on Lily's room side, tucked almost out of sight, was a small, rectangular shape. Not cardboard. Something sturdier. Wood? Daniel's breath hitched. He reached in, his arm scraping against rough wood, cobwebs clinging like gossamer chains. His fingers brushed against smooth, cool wood. He grasped it, pulling it carefully through the jagged opening. It was a box. A small, simple wooden box, perhaps 6 inches long and 4 wide, sanded smooth, but unfinished, the grain visible. It had no latch, no hinges. The lid was simply a snug-fitting piece of wood slid into grooves. Dusty? Yes, but intact. Unmistakably handmade. By him. Memory struck like a physical blow. Lily, maybe 8 years old, obsessed with pirates and buried treasure. They'd spent a Saturday afternoon in his cramped workshop area in the basement, a space long since abandoned. He'd helped her cut the wood, sand the edges, groove the lid. She'd painted it later, bright swirling colors now faded and obscured under years of dust, declaring it her secret time capsule box. She'd been so proud. He remembered her intense concentration as she'd carefully selected items to place inside, swearing him to secrecy. He'd forgotten. Utterly. Completely. Buried under work stress, the slow erosion of his marriage, the drift from his daughter. The box, like the drawing, had vanished from his mind, but not from Lily's. She'd hidden it, here, in the magic hiding place he'd suggested. Daniel sat back on his heels, the box resting heavily in his dusty palms. Smudge, having deemed itself sufficiently clean, padded over and sat beside him. Tail curled neatly around its paws, watching the box with calm, green-eyed interest, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. The apartment was utterly silent now. Even the radiator seemed to hold its breath. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside slick and reflective under the streetlights. Daniel stared at the box. It felt charged, like holding a live wire, or Pandora's vessel. He hesitated. Did he want to know? Did he want to confront? The artifacts of a time when he was still daddy, a hero, not the absent failure Lily saw now? The drawing was painful enough. What else would this box reveal? More innocent declarations of love that now felt like accusations? But Smudge nudged his knee with its head. A soft, insistent pressure. Look. The cat's gaze was unwavering. Daniel took a deep, shuddering breath that tasted of dust and regret. He slid the lid off the box. Inside, nestled in a bed of faded, crumpled tissue paper, were treasures. Lily's treasures. A smooth, gray river stone, a slightly bent, iridescent blue jay feather, A plastic ring from a gumball machine, its diamond chipped. A small, laminated photo, Lily beaming, missing her 2 front teeth, riding his shoulders at the county fair. He remembered that day. The sticky cotton candy, her shrieks of laughter on the Ferris wheel, the way she'd clung to his neck. The ache in his chest was a physical thing. And then, a small notebook. Not a diary, really. Just a cheap, spiral-bound memo pad, the kind sold in packs at the drugstore. The cover was decorated with faded stickers, stars, hearts, a glittery unicorn. Lily's printing, large and looping, filled the first page. My secret thoughts. Keep out! Except Daddy, if he promises not to laugh. Daniel's vision blurred. He picked up the notebook. It felt impossibly light, yet weighed down with years. He opened it. The pages were filled with the earnest, chaotic thoughts of a young girl, complaints about broccoli, excitement about a school play, a carefully drawn map of the best hiding spots in the park, silly jokes, declarations of best friends forever, since changed, he knew. He flipped through, a lump forming in his throat. Then, near the middle, the entries changed. The writing was smaller, tighter, less exuberant, more thoughtful, sad. Mom and Dad are talking in low voices again. Like they think I can't hear. It makes my tummy hurt. Dad promised he'd come to my soccer game. He didn't. Mom said he had to work. Again. Jenny's dad was there. He cheered really loud. I showed Dad my A+ on the math test. He said, "Good job, kiddo," but he was looking at his phone. He didn't even see the gold star. I hid my time capsule box today in the best secret spot ever. Maybe someday Dad will find it. When he has time. The entries became sparser, the tone flatter. They said they're not mad at each other, but they don't smile much anymore, not like in my picture. Dad forgot my birthday dinner. Mom took me for pizza. It was okay, but it wasn't the same. And then, the last entry. The date was about a year before Sarah moved out. The writing was neater, almost deliberate. The ink slightly smudged, as if by a tear. Dear Secret Box, don't think Dad looks for me anymore. Not really. He looks at his work. He looks at his phone. He looks tired. But he doesn't look at me. Not like he used to. When he used to see me. Really see me. I miss my dad. The one who built forts and found secret hiding spots. Where did he go? Did I do something wrong? I hope he finds this box. Someday. So he knows I was waiting. I was always waiting. Daniel stopped breathing. The words on the page blurred, swimming in the tears that finally spilled over, hot and unchecked, tracing paths through the dust on his cheeks. A low, involuntary moan escaped him, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish. It echoed in the silent hallway, raw and broken. He'd known he'd failed. He'd felt the distance, the coolness in Lily's eyes during those strained weekend visits. But reading it here, in her own childhood hand, the simple, devastating articulation of her loss, it was a spear through his heart. Where did he go? Did I do something wrong? I was always waiting. The guilt he'd carried crystallized into something agonizingly sharp, undeniable. He doubled over, the notebook falling from his nerveless fingers onto the dusty floor beside the drawing. The box tumbled from his lap. Sobs racked his body, violent and uncontrollable. He buried his face in his dusty hands, shoulders heaving, the sounds tearing from his throat. Guttural cries of grief, of shame, of profound, irreparable loss. He wept for the father he hadn't been, for the daughter he'd abandoned long before the divorce, for the trust he'd shattered, for the bright, sticky-fingered girl who had loved him unconditionally, whom he had slowly, thoughtlessly erased with his absence. The weight of it crushed him. He felt like he was drowning in dust and regret. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the devastating truth of Lily's words carving into his soul. Then, warmth. Pressure. Through the haze of tears and the crushing weight of his grief, he felt it. Smudge. The cat had climbed onto his hunched back, not settling, not just sitting, climbing deliberately, carefully, finding purchase on his shaking shoulders. Then, slowly, deliberately, Smudge moved. Down his arm, onto his lap, nudging aside the fallen box and notebook. The cat didn't meow, didn't demand attention. It simply pressed its small, solid body firmly against Daniel's chest, right over his pounding, broken heart. It tucked its head under his chin, the way it had bumped his shin that first vulnerable night. And it purred. Not the soft, sleepy rumble from the couch. This was a deep, resonant vibration, a powerful, steady thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very core of the small creature. It filled the space between them, a tangible, living frequency that cut through the static of Daniel's sobs. It vibrated against his sternum, against his ribs, a physical anchor in the storm of his despair. Daniel instinctively wrapped his arms around the cat, burying his face in the soft, dusty fur at Smudge's neck. He felt the rapid flutter of the cat's heartbeat against his own erratic pulse. He felt the unwavering solidity of its small body, a counterweight to his own collapse. The purr wasn't just sound. It was a physical sensation, a grounding force, a relentless, wordless insistence. You are here. I am here. This pain is real, but you are not alone in it. He clung to Smudge, the sobs gradually losing their violence, dissolving into shuddering breaths and silent tears that soaked into the cat's fur. The purr never faltered. It was a lifeline, a steady hum in the wreckage of his heart. Smudge didn't try to fix it, didn't offer solutions, just offered presence. Pure, unwavering, purring presence. A small, dusty, rescued creature holding space for a grief too large for words. In that moment, Daniel understood something fundamental. Smudge hadn't just led him to a drawing, or a box, or even Lily's hidden pain. The cat had led him to his own pain. The pain he'd been running from, burying under work and guilt and silence, just as effectively as Lily had buried her treasures in the wall. Smudge had clawed through his walls too. And now, curled against him, purring with a strength that defied its size, the cat was offering the only thing that could possibly hold him together. Simple, silent, unconditional companionship in the heart of the storm. He wept until he had no tears left, the purr a constant soothing thrum against his shattered heart. The dust settled around them. The hole in the wall gaped, a silent witness. The artifacts of the past lay scattered on the floor. But Daniel, broken open and raw, finally saw himself clearly. Not through the lens of Sarah's disappointment or the court documents, but through the unflinching, loving eyes of the child he'd failed, and the quiet, persistent gaze of the stray who refused to let him drown in the darkness alone. The journey into the wall was over. The journey into himself had just begun. Has an animal ever been your anchor during a storm of emotion? How did their quiet presence help you weather it? Share below. Sometimes the deepest comfort has fur and a heartbeat. Dawn found them there. Daniel, slumped against the hallway wall, legs stretched out, his back stiff from hours of stillness. Smudge, curled in the hollow of his lap, the purring finally quiet, but the warmth lingering like an echo. The first pale light seeped through the apartment windows, painting the dust motes gold, glinting off the small treasures scattered on the floor. The drawing, the box, the notebook with its damning childish script. His eyes were raw. His throat ached. His clothes were stiff with dried plaster dust and sweat. But for the first time in years, his mind was clear. Not numb, not frantic, just clear. The grief hadn't disappeared. It sat inside him, heavy but no longer suffocating. Smudge had purred him through the worst of the storm, and now, in the quiet aftermath, Daniel could finally think. He looked down at the cat. Smudge blinked up at him slowly, that deliberate, trusting gesture, before stretching, claws flexing gently against Daniel's thigh and hopping down. The cat padded a few steps away, then turned, looking back at him expectantly. "Get up." Daniel exhaled. He gathered Lily's treasures carefully, placing them back into the wooden box, but leaving the notebook out. He set it all on the hallway table. Then, stiffly, he pushed himself to his feet. His body protested, knees cracking, back aching, but he ignored it. He followed Smudge into the kitchen. The cat sat pointedly beside its empty food bowl. A laugh, rusty and unexpected, escaped Daniel. Of course. Even after the emotional earthquake of the night, some things remained unchanged. He filled the bowl, refreshed the water, then leaned against the counter, watching as Smudge ate with quiet satisfaction. The mundane act grounded him. Life went on. Cats needed feeding, dishes needed washing, walls needed patching, but he needed to make a choice. He picked up the notebook again, flipping to the last entry. "I hope he finds this box, someday. So he knows I was waiting. I was always waiting." The words still cut, but differently now. Not just as a condemnation, but as a chance. Lily had hidden this box, hoping he'd find it, hoping he'd see her. And now, years too late, he had. Was it too late to answer her? He thought of the last strained visit, Lily sitting on the edge, of the couch, scrolling through her phone, giving monosyllabic answers to his awkward questions. The distance between them had felt insurmountable. But now he held proof that she'd once loved him enough to leave a trail of breadcrumbs back to her heart. Smudge finished eating, licked a paw, and then jumped onto the kitchen table. Something Daniel usually discouraged. But this time he didn't shoo the cat away. Smudge sat beside the notebook, tail curled neatly, watching him with those unreadable green eyes. Daniel reached out, running a finger over the faded unicorn sticker on the notebook's cover. "I have to try," he said aloud, his voice rough from disuse and tears. Smudge blinked. The hardware store was crowded for a Sunday afternoon. Daniel stood in the plaster aisle, staring at the array of patching compounds, his mind only half on the task. The other half was turning over the words he'd drafted and redrafted in his head all morning. Words for Lily. A man in a red vest asked if he needed help. Daniel nodded absently. "Just something to fix a hole in the wall. Not too big. Drywall patch or plaster?" "Plaster, I think." The man handed him a small tub. "This'll do. Sand it smooth once it's dry, prime, then paint." Daniel thanked him, but as he turned to leave, he hesitated. What if I'm not ready to paint over it yet?" The man shrugged. "Then don't. Patch it, leave it, it's your wall." "It's your wall." Daniel paid, the words echoing in his head. He didn't patch the hole that day. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table, a blank sheet of paper in front of him, pen hovering. Smudge sprawled beside him, a silent, warm presence. He wrote, he crossed, things out. He wrote again. The afternoon light faded. The streetlights outside flickered on. Smudge dozed, twitching occasionally in some feline dream. Finally, Daniel set the pen down. He folded the letter carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote Lily's name on the front. Then he picked up the small wooden box. He placed the letter inside, along with the drawing, the feather, the stone, all of it. But he kept the notebook. That he needed to hold on to a little longer. He carried the box to the hallway. The hole in the wall gaped, the edges ragged. He crouched, the floor creaking under his weight, and gently slid the box back into the cavity, nestling it, where it had been hidden for years. Then he stood looking at the hole. He could patch it now. Seal it up. Pretend he'd never found it. But that wasn't the choice he'd made. Instead, he reached for the small, cheap frame he'd bought at the drugstore along with the plaster. Inside it was a photocopy of Lily's drawing, Family, the original safe in the box. He hung the frame on the wall beside the hole, right at the height she'd been when she'd hidden it. A marker, a reminder, a promise. Smudge wound between his legs, purring softly. Daniel reached down, scratching behind the cat's scarred ear. "I'm not sealing it up," he murmured. "Not yet. Because some walls needed to stay open a little longer. Have you ever left something unfinished, a project, a letter, a conversation, because you weren't ready to let go? What did it teach you?" The waiting was a physical ache. Daniel mailed the letter on a Monday morning, slipping it into the blue mailbox on the corner like depositing a fragile piece of his own heart. The act felt terrifyingly final. Smudge watched from the windowsill as he walked back to the apartment, tail twitching like a metronome, counting down the seconds until something. Until silence? Until rejection? Days bled into a week. Life resumed its surface rhythm. Daniel went to work. He fixed the leaky faucet he'd ignored for months. He bought groceries, actually cooking simple meals instead of burning leftovers. He even started sanding the patched hole in the hallway wall, the fine white dust settling like a shroud over the framed copy of Lily's family drawing. He didn't paint over it. Not yet. But beneath the semblance of normalcy, a raw nerve hummed. Every time his phone buzzed, his stomach clenched. Every knock at the door sent his heart into his throat. Silence felt heavier than before, now charged with the agonizing weight of hope deferred. Smudge sensed it. The cat's watchfulness intensified. It shadowed Daniel more closely, often curling up on the arm of the chair while he sat staring blankly. At the TV, or perched on the edge of the bathtub while he showered, a silent, green-eyed sentinel. Its purr, usually a soft background thrum, became louder, more insistent when Daniel's shoulders slumped or his gaze grew distant. It was a constant, warm pressure against the chilling dread. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if you're listening alone tonight, know I made this story for you. Subscribe if you want more comfort like this. One rainy Thursday evening, exactly 10 days after mailing the letter, Daniel arrived home late. Traffic had been snarled, the relentless downpour, turning the streets into murky rivers. He was soaked, exhausted, and the silence of the apartment felt like a physical blow. He dropped his keys on the counter with a clatter that echoed too loudly. "No Smudge! Smudge!" he called, peeling off his wet jacket. No answering chirp, no soft pad of feet. A flicker of the old panic ignited. Not the cat, not now. He walked quickly, through the living room towards the hallway, and stopped. Smudge was sitting perfectly still on the rug right in front of Lily's door. Not looking at the door, not looking at the patched wall or the drawing, staring intently down the hallway, towards the front door. Its ears were pricked forward, swiveling slightly. Its body was rigid, coiled, every muscle taut. Its tail was absolutely still, not a single twitch. Daniel froze. "What is it, pal?" he murmured, his voice tight. Smudge didn't look at him, didn't blink. Its gaze remained fixed down the dim hallway towards the unseen front door. Its nostrils flared slightly, as if catching a scent on the damp air drifting under the door. A sound? Daniel strained his ears. Rain lashed the windows. The radiator hissed. City sounds, distant sirens, the whoosh of a passing car filtered in. Nothing unusual. But Smudge remained utterly focused. A low sound vibrated in its chest. Not a purr, not a growl, a hum. A warning? An alert? Daniel's skin prickled. The cat's intensity was unnerving. Had it heard something he hadn't? A footstep in the hall? A voice? His mind leaped to Lily. Was she here? The thought was so terrifyingly hopeful, so devastatingly unlikely, that he dismissed it instantly. Foolish. Wishful thinking. Probably. Just Mrs. Henderson's yappy dog down the hall, he said, more to himself than Smudge, trying to shake off the sudden chill. He walked towards the cat, intending to scoop it up. Smudge didn't move. As he approached, it lifted one paw, very deliberately, and placed it on the floor in front of him, blocking his path slightly. Its eyes finally flicked to his, just for a second. The message was clear. Stop. Listen. Daniel halted, a foot from the cat. He stood still, forcing himself to breathe quietly, to listen past the rain and the radiator. Nothing. Then, a sound. Faint. Muffled by the door and the rain. Not a knock, not a voice. A sniffle. Soft. Wet. Miserable. Followed by a choked, shuddering breath. The sound pierced Daniel like an icicle. It wasn't Mrs. Henderson. It wasn't a neighbor. It was young. Female. And it was coming from just outside his door. His blood turned to ice water. Lily. He moved. Fast. Past Smudge, who finally broke its stance and darted after him. He yanked open the front door. There she was, huddled against the wall in the dimly lit hallway, soaked to the skin. Her hair plastered to her face, mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. She wore a thin hoodie and jeans, no coat, shivering violently. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself. She looked up as the door opened, her eyes wide, red-rimmed, filled with a storm of anger, hurt, and sheer desperate vulnerability. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other. The years of distance, the unspoken accusations, the ocean of hurt crashed between them in the narrow hallway. The only sounds were the drumming rain and Lily's ragged breathing. Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came. His mind was blank, wiped clean by the shock of seeing her here, like this. Lily's gaze flickered past him, into the apartment. It landed on Smudge, who had appeared silently at Daniel's side, sitting calmly, watching her with those unblinking green eyes. Her breath hitched. Her eyes widened further, not with surprise, but with a dawning, painful recognition. Then her gaze snapped back to Daniel, burning with sudden, fierce accusation. She thrust a crumpled piece of paper towards him. It was the letter he'd sent. Rain had blurred some of the ink. "You," her voice was raw, trembling. "You sent me this? And you have that?" She gestured wildly towards Smudge, her voice rising. "You have him? You kept him?" Daniel flinched. Confusion warred with the overwhelming need to pull her inside, out of the cold. "Lily, honey, come in, you're freezing. Did you keep him?" she demanded, ignoring his plea, her voice cracking. "The cat! The little gray cat from the park! The one I tried to save!" The words slammed into Daniel like a physical blow. The park? Memory, fragmented and sharp, pierced his confusion. Years ago, Lily, maybe 10 or 11, frantic. Coming home late, muddy, tear-streaked, talking about a kitten she'd found tangled in brambles near the old oak tree in the park, how she'd tried to free it, how it had been so scared, how it had scratched her and bolted before she could get it loose. She'd been inconsolable for days. Daniel had been... what? Distracted? Working late? He vaguely remembered patting her shoulder, saying something inadequate about how she'd tried. Her best. Maybe the cat found its way home. He hadn't gone back to look. He hadn't really listened. He stared at Smudge, the patchy gray fur, the nicked ear, a scar that could easily have come from thorns, the wary intelligence, the uncanny connection to Lily's hidden pain. This was the cat? This was the frightened creature Lily had tried to save years ago, the one he'd dismissed. And somehow, against all odds, it had found its way back. Not to Lily, but to him? Found its way into his car engine, led him to her hidden cries for help? The sheer impossible symmetry of it stole his breath. It wasn't just a rescue. It was a circle closing, a debt repaid by the universe in the form of a small, scarred creature. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes again. Not just for his failure then, but for the staggering, humbling reality of it now. Smudge hadn't just saved him from his emotional breakdown. Smudge had brought him back to the moment he'd failed Lily most profoundly and given him a chance, this impossible, rain-soaked chance, to face it. He looked from Smudge's calm, knowing gaze to Lily's shattered, accusing one. "Yes," he whispered, the words scraping his throat. "Yes, Lily. I think this is him. He found me." Lily stared at him, then at Smudge. Her fierce anger seemed to crumple, replaced by a wave of bewildered grief. A sob tore from her. I tried to save him." "I know you did, baby," Daniel said, his voice thick. "I know you did. And he..." He looked at Smudge, who blinked, slowly, first at him, then at Lily. "He saved me." He stepped forward, tentatively, slowly opening his arms, not demanding, just offering. An open door. Lily hesitated for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. Rain dripped from her hair. She looked down at the crumpled letter in her hand, then back at Daniel's face, seeing, perhaps for the first time in years, the raw, unguarded pain and regret mirrored there. Then, with a broken cry, she stumbled forward, collapsing into his arms. He caught her, holding her tight as she sobbed against his chest, her thin body shaking violently with cold and years of pent-up hurt. He buried his face in her wet hair, murmuring wordless comforts, holding her as if he could absorb all her pain, all the cold, all the years of distance. They stood like that in the open doorway, rain gusting into the hallway, clinging to each other as the storm raged outside, and the quieter, deeper storm within them finally broke. Smudge didn't approach, didn't demand attention. The cat sat just inside the threshold, a silent, watchful guardian. Its green eyes reflected the dim hallway light, calm and deep as old forests. Its purr started then, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, a steady, grounding counterpoint to Lily's ragged sobs and Daniel's own shuddering breaths. It wasn't the reunion Daniel had imagined. There was no easy forgiveness, no instant healing. The hurt was too deep, the history too tangled. But it was a beginning. A fragile, rain-soaked, tear-streaked beginning, built not on grand gestures, but on a letter found in a wall, a cat who refused to be forgotten, and a truth that could no longer be hidden. Smudge's final gift wasn't just bringing Lily to the door. It was revealing the invisible thread that had connected them all along, the thread of a lost kitten, a child's compassion, a father's blindness, and a stray's quiet, persistent journey back to the heart of the family it had never truly left. The circle was complete. The lost had been found. Not just the cat, all of them. Have you ever experienced a moment where an animal seemed to bridge a gap between people? How did it change the relationship? The rain softened to a drizzle, then stopped. Inside Daniel's apartment, the air hung thick with the scent of wet clothes, plaster dust, and something far more fragile, the tentative beginnings of a truce. Lily sat huddled on the couch, wrapped in Daniel's thickest, oldest sweater, dwarfed by its size, clutching a mug of steaming herbal tea he'd fumbled to make. Her eyes were still puffy, her face pale, but the raw, panicked energy had subsided into a bone-deep exhaustion. Daniel sat in the armchair opposite, not too close, giving her space, his own hands wrapped around a cooling mug of coffee he hadn't touched. Smudge lay stretched out on the rug between them, a furry, purring buffer zone, occasionally opening one eye to observe them before drifting back into a watchful doze. Silence stretched, heavy but not entirely hostile. It was the silence of two people standing on the rubble of their past, unsure where to place the first stone. Daniel's gaze kept drifting to the hallway, to the patched wall and the framed family drawing. Lily's eyes followed his, then flickered. Away, her fingers tightening on the mug. "Smudge," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. She looked down at the cat. You really called him that?" Daniel managed a small, shaky smile. "Seemed to fit. Found him covered in engine grease." Lily nodded slowly, her gaze tracing the lines of Smudge's gray fur, the familiar nick on his ear. "He's bigger now, but it's him. I know it is." A fresh tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. "I looked for him for days. After he ran." Her voice cracked on the last word. I thought the brambles hurt him worse. Or a car." She shuddered. "I'm sorry, Lily," Daniel said, the words scraping raw. "I'm so sorry I didn't listen better, that I didn't help you look." The admission hung in the air, stark and necessary. Lily didn't look at him. She stared into her tea. "You were always busy." It wasn't an accusation now, just a weary statement of fact. "I was," Daniel acknowledged, the truth bitter on his tongue. "And I was wrong. So wrong. I missed everything." His eyes flickered to the hallway again. "I missed the drawings, the box, the waiting." He swallowed hard. "Reading your words, Lily, it broke me." She finally looked up then, her eyes meeting his, searching his face. Seeing the raw honesty, the depth of the regret he wasn't trying to hide anymore. "You kept the notebook?" she asked quietly. He nodded. It's important. It's the truth. My truth to carry." Another long pause. Smudge sighed deeply in his sleep, a soft, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The sound was oddly grounding. "Can I?" Lily hesitated, her voice small. "Can I see the box? The real one? Inside the wall?" Daniel's breath caught. "Of course." He stood, moving carefully, aware of her flinch when he got too close. He walked. To the hallway, Smudge instantly awake and padding silently after him. He crouched by the patched hole, the sanded plaster smooth under his fingertips. He carefully removed the small square of drywall patch he'd temporarily taped over the cavity. He hadn't filled it, hadn't sealed it away again. He reached in, his fingers finding the familiar smooth wood. He pulled the small treasure, box out into the light. He carried it back to the living room, placing it gently on the coffee table in front of Lily. Smudge jumped onto the couch beside her, not touching, but close. A quiet presence. Lily stared at the box, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached out and traced the faded swirls of paint. A lifetime of memories seemed to flicker across her face. Pride, secrecy, childish joy, and the later layers of disappointment and loss. She slid the lid off, seeing her own childhood treasures. The stone, the feather, the chipped ring seemed to unlock something. A soft gasp escaped her. She picked up the laminated photo, her younger self beaming, from Daniel's shoulders. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, fleeting and fragile. "And the drawing?" she asked, her voice thick. "Originals in there," Daniel said softly. I framed a copy to see every day." He gestured towards the hallway. Lily looked towards the framed family, then back at the open box. She picked up the letter Daniel had placed inside. His words, his apology, his plea for a chance now slightly damp from the rain. She didn't open it. She just held it, her thumb rubbing the edge of the envelope. "Why didn't you just patch the wall?" she asked suddenly, looking at him. "After you found it, why leave it open? Why hang the picture?" Daniel met her gaze. "Because hiding it again felt like lying. To you. To myself. The whole. It's where the truth came out. Sealing it felt like sealing it all back in. The picture," he paused, struggling. "It's a reminder of what I lost, of what I want, what I hope. Maybe someday I can earn back a little piece of it." Lily looked down at the box, at his letter, then at Smudge, who had now curled into a ball beside her, his purr a gentle vibration against her leg, the cat's calm acceptance, his quiet insistence on being here in this tense, painful space, felt like a silent argument for possibility. "It's not going to be easy," she said quietly, not looking up. "I know," Daniel said instantly. "I don't expect it to be. I don't expect anything, Lily. Just a chance to try. To be here. To listen. Really listen this time." She was silent for a long moment, absorbing his words, the weight of the box in her hands, the warmth of the cat. Beside her, the apartment held its breath. The only sounds were Smudge's purr and the distant drip of rainwater from the fire escape outside. "Smudge seems to like it here," she murmured finally, her fingers tentatively brushing the soft fur behind the cat's scarred ear. Smudge stretched into the touch, his purr deepening. Daniel's heart clenched with a fragile hope. "He does," he agreed softly. He found his way home, in a way. He didn't just mean the apartment." Lily looked up then, her eyes meeting his. The anger was still there, banked but present. The hurt was a deep river. But beneath it, for the first time in years, Daniel saw something else. A flicker of the child who had drawn the smiling family. A flicker of hesitant curiosity. A door, not slammed shut, but perhaps cracked open. Can I stay here tonight?" she asked, the words barely audible. I don't want to go. Back to Mom's right now. Not like this." Relief, profound and dizzying, washed over Daniel. "Yes," he breathed. "Of course. Yes. Your room. It's just like you left it." He didn't add that he'd kept it that way, a silent shrine to his failure. Now perhaps it could be something else. Lily nodded, a single sharp movement. She carefully placed the treasures back into the box, slid the lid on, and held it in, her lap. Smudge, sensing a shift, stood and stretched, then hopped down, heading towards Lily's room. He stopped at the open doorway, looking back at them, his tail held high. Daniel stood slowly. "I'll get you some dry clothes. Towels." He moved towards the linen closet, his movements careful, giving her space. Lily stood too, holding the box. She walked slowly down the hallway, pausing before her old room. She looked at the framed drawing beside the patched wall. She touched the frame lightly with her fingertips. Then she looked down at Smudge, waiting patiently in the doorway. She took a deep breath, stepped over the threshold, and disappeared into her room, closing the door softly behind her. Smudge, after a moment's hesitation, pushed the door open a crack with his nose and slipped in after her. Daniel stood in the hallway listening to the muffled sounds from Lily's room, drawers opening, the soft thud of the wooden box being set down, the faint murmur of Lily's voice, probably talking to Smudge. The radiator hissed. The city hummed outside. The patched wall was smooth under his gaze, the framed drawing a bright spot in the dim light. He didn't hear the scratching anymore. The ghosts had been let out. The wall bore its scar, but it was healing. The treasures were back in the light. The lost cat had found his way home, and in doing so had shown the lost people the way back to each other. Not to the past, that was gone, sealed away like the brittle plaster dust, but to a different future, one built on the shaky ground of hard truths, painful memories, and the quiet, purring insistence of a second chance. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be stumbles, silences that stretched too long, moments when the old hurts flared. But Smudge was there, a small, gray, living reminder that sometimes rescue comes from the most unexpected places, that sometimes love persists, even when it's buried deep, that sometimes the thing that hides in the dark isn't a monster, but a frightened creature waiting for a gentle hand to lead it back into the light, and that the light it finds can illuminate the way for others, lost in their own darkness. Daniel leaned his forehead against the cool plaster beside Lily's framed drawing. He closed his eyes, listening to the faint sounds of life, her life, returning to the room down the hall. And beneath it, like a steady, comforting heartbeat, he could just make out the deep, resonant purr of a small cat who had, against all odds, saved his whole family. Not from a burning building or a raging river, but from the slow, silent breakdown of their own hearts. The most important rescue of all. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning again. On patched walls and open doors, and the quiet, unwavering faith of a creature who had never stopped believing in the possibility of home, you stayed till the end. Thank you. If it felt like a soft hug or a warm purr in your heart, subscribing lets me bring you more moments like this. What small, unexpected moment in your life ended up changing everything? Was there a quiet witness, human or animal, to that change? Share your story below. Sometimes the biggest shifts start with the softest sound.